Now, regrettably, confronted by multiple theaters of war and scenes of horror and famine flowing from that war, armed conflict instead of pursued development. Citizens of every country as well, struggling to contain the rising cost of living and the implications for them and their families on a day-to-day basis.
Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing fine. Now let's watch this speech of Barbados Prime Minister Mottley, where she destroyed Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, and Joe Biden, the president of the US, for accusing Africa and black people of not doing the best to curb global warming. Now she comes out and tells them, now listen, this problem was not created by us. So black people should never be harassed because of global warming. This problem began and was created by Europe and US. So you have to keep quiet and start working to actually correct the mess that you brought to the world. So let's watch this video, then have a very quick discussion at the end of it. Thank you so much.
And we're here because even though noises were made every decade for the last few decades that things ought to change, they continued in the same direction. Fueled by greed, fueled by inequity, fueled by marginalization, fueled by values reflected by human beings taking decisions, or as His Holiness would say to us, from literally the desensitization that comes that allows us to take comfort in ignoring what we see and what we hear. I take comfort this evening from the fact that we are here. But we being here will only be a record or a footnote in history if our actions just end here. Yes, the conclusion of the Pact for the Future is the seminal treaty and theoretical point from which we want to take our action. But the truth is that that may become just simply another document in history if all that we have come to do is to secure a pact. We have now to ensure that we enlarge the people, the army, the believers, the doers, who are prepared to say that in the same way history can record successfully that slavery was wrong and needed to be abolished, in the same way that we can have history record successfully that women should have the right of agency over their vote and their body, in the same way that history can record successfully that the people who live in separate and apart systems in South Africa, or regrettably now as we see in the Middle East, that they should be freed from the bondages that allow others to determine what their destiny should be and to be able to secure it for themselves and the least capable among them. If you lived at those points in history, you might well have said that the battle was impossible. But we know enough to know, as President Mandela told us, it is not impossible if it can be done, or it is impossible until it is done. This world can change, but it needs our energy, our commitment. And in the same way, in electoral matters, we go out and find other people to help us proselytize and canvass. We must now go out and find ordinary citizens who are prepared to say that they're not wishing to be pawns anymore of others, and that the notion of two worlds One for those who have, and the rest for those who are relegated to not have it. One for those who see people and feel people and understand their obligation to help, and others who are insensitive and do not, quite frankly, care or see those around them. If we doubted the power of the people, we only need to see where that power has made significant changes, even in this year that we live in. But what matters now is that there be coordinated action, and that we believe and that we sell and share with each other that there is a possibility for a win-win, that there is a possibility for us to have a green transition that can mitigate the damages that would otherwise come from the climate crisis, that there is the possibility for ensuring greater equitable access to artificial intelligence, and that the power of regulation can ensure that it be a force for good and not an instrument of oppression or recolonization of the earth. That it is possible for us to be able to take stances that recognize that investment in education will always trump conflict and war and guns, but that there may be difficult decisions that we may have to make too. And the problem is that if we have a world that is dominated only by 60-second sound bites and 4-column inches, rather than allowing the spaces for discussion as we are doing in here, not just at the UN, but in the villages, in the towns, in the communities, in the homes, in the households, that if we don't get that discussion going, we're not going to get the level of participation, and we're not going to build the momentum necessary that can move the inequity and that can remove the threats that this world has. I believe that it is possible for us to have a win-win. I believe that hope can be restored, but I do recognize that we are at that inflection point. And those who have power and want to maintain the status quo, even though they do not yet have a plan for allowing us to live on Mars, they are adamant on not creating the space or the policy flexibility or the access to the funding necessary for us to bring along others. It is unconscionable for us not to recognize that unless we can provide the basics of food, water, shelter, electricity to all people on this earth, we cannot talk about being a successful generation in human civilization. And we all know that there is sufficient to be able to share. What is needed is the change in attitude and values. I'm not going to reflect only on the fact that almost every religion carries us in the direction of caring for the most vulnerable, because people may want then to get into the schisms and isms of religious differences. But there is, in African civilization, the concept of Ubuntu. I am because you are. I am because we are. And if you hear me repeat it all week, please forgive me. I'm not repeating it because I'm just looking for something to say. I'm repeating it because the establishment of a shared destiny, a common mission. And I want to salute the Secretary General, who very often has not been given his due. The common agenda sets out where we must go. The Sustainable Development Goals are the roadmap. The Sustainable Development Goals is where we hit the road with the words of the opening words of this chart, as we heard from the young people yesterday, we the peoples. If we cannot provide for the peoples the basic rights as reflected in the SDGs, then we have banished them to another generation of failed souls at the very time when the world has more to offer them than it has ever offered them. I want us to leave here with a pep in our step and with a commitment to the principles that can truly bring harmony and a shared mission to save planet and people. There will be much that we can call upon to show the divisions, and there is much that we can do to fuel hate. But above all else, if we succumb to those divisions and hate, we will forever be condemned, because at this inflection point, we have the ability to come together as human beings to save the people and to save the planet. It does mean adjustment. It does mean hard work. It does mean sacrifice. But above all else, it is built on a heart of caring and a creative capacity that our minds have, that if we don't use it, then we will lose it. Let us, therefore, defend the pact for the future, but more importantly, bring others to understand what it is, what it means, and what is the win-win for every human being. Will we get all? Probably not. But our failure to try and our failure to press ahead is what we will be condemned for. And I pray that even at this moment of great challenge, of great disruption, that we as human beings will show why we on this earth are a resilient species and why we have within us, the capacity to do right and to be the right person for the time by advancing not just our individual interests, but recognizing our common destiny. I am because you are. I am because we are. Thank you. As I said, Mr. President, we need a reset, and we need to reset. Those of us here today representing our brothers and our sisters the world over have endured 4 years of polycrises. As the children of Mother Earth, we continue to wrestle with the climate crisis. As a human family, we grapple with the legacy of the pandemic. As a digitally connected people, we are now, and Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, we are all now threatened by the second but silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, together with a growing incidence of death and disability from chronic non-communicable diseases. We cannot afford the distraction of war. If ever there was a time to pause and to reset, it is now. Collectively as an international community, and individually as leaders in each of our countries, we must now deliver new opportunities and solutions to these crises which dampen economic growth, which restrict the ambitions of our people and numb our sense of the beauty and goodness that the world ought to be offering because it has it to offer. The reset for which I am calling, and indeed all of our citizens are demanding, must see an end to all forms of discrimination. That rules and institutions today exist which create first and second class citizens, as we have said from this podium year after year, depending on your nation of origin, militate against the trust and the credibility and the hope, and it fosters a crisis of confidence in the existing international order, which must become inclusive and responsive for all. More than any other complaint from this podium has been the disparity in treatment and the inability to be able to have fair and transparent treatment for all that would lead to the trust necessary for us to solve the problems of our times that are truly beyond man-made causes. Neo-colonialist structures that perpetuate and reflect an old world order characterized by racism and classism and misogyny, while ignoring the legitimate aspirations of billions, will not help to foster the hope or trust that is necessary to meet these polycrises. We must ensure that the global institutions give developing countries, especially small vulnerable states like my own, or vulnerable middle-income countries, seats at the table of decision-making where we can be seen, heard, become active agents in our own cause and lead our own development paradigms. My friends, we are reminded that 2024 is the final year of the United Nations Decade for the People of African Descent. Much has been achieved, but the recognition, the justice, and the development for people of African descent that was promised by this decade has, to say the least, not yet been fully realized. And it is for this reason that the Caribbean community joins the growing chorus, and my own country in particular, for the immediate proclamation of a second decade to complete the unfinished work and address the matter of reparations for slavery and colonialism. I start here because this is a necessary but complex conversation, and the Caribbean community is resolute that it must happen. Its resolution lies, and I want to be very clear, its resolution lies in a multi-generational approach, in the same way that the 20 million pounds sterling debt that was incurred by the British government only was repaid in this 21st century, almost 200 years later, so that the notion of unaffordability becomes a non-issue once we recognize that the solution to reparations must be multi-generational and grounded in development. Mr. President, of necessity, the reset must also be characterized by institutional reform, which has to start in the United Nations councils. These councils suggest that some are full members, and others are only part members, and some may be part-time members, and some may be occasional members. All of this has no place in the 21st century. And the anger and the mistrust of our citizens and institutions, in leaders, in multilateralism, and in the processes which exclude while yielding much talk and little action is very real. And nowhere is reform and consequently trust and hope more important to the well-being of billions of people today than in relation to the global financial architecture. Restricted access to capital, its disproportionately high costs, barring us from doing that which we must, its inadequate scale, and the overwhelming burden of debt often imposed on us by circumstances beyond our control. These are all now combining to force governments in the world's poorest countries, and frankly, across many vulnerable middle-income countries, to devote more resources to debt service than to health and education, and in some instances, even infrastructure. For far too many members of the human family, cold ground is our bed, and rock is our pillow. Too many go to bed with their bellies hungry, and too many may not even have a bed. Our reset must therefore collectively build a common agenda that reflects and reinforces our shared humanity. It is that shared humanity that binds us together. Mr. President, you know better than most. Our African brothers and sisters got it right with the principle of Ubuntu, and have used this principle, this General Assembly, to remind us that its simplicity is what we should aspire to. I am because you are. I am because we are. My well-being is tied to yours, and our collective well-being is connected to Mother Earth's. This best voices the approach needed to give expression to the reset that is absolutely necessary. And we acknowledge that there are glimpses of hope. We have, for example, on Monday, agreed to a pact for the future, but we still have war. We have agreed on a global digital compact, but we still have raging pandemics in the slow motion silent pandemic. All of this rests, my friends, on the common agenda that the Secretary General had set out for us before. Yesterday, we agreed in a high-level meeting on a political declaration on antimicrobial resistance. A lot of fancy words, but this is where the rubber hits the road. Because all of us in this room know people who have died from infections and for whom the antibiotics simply are no longer effective. So that within 48 hours, a person's life is snuffed out, almost as if they were at war. My friends, following on the intervention of the Bridgetown Initiative and the Paris Pact for People and Planet, the efforts of many across the board, we acknowledge that there is some hope. And it is evident in the beginnings of the reform that we are seeing little by little, but nevertheless, they have started. These are all important steps, but we cannot take our eyes off the prize. Barbados' call for a fundamental reset includes attitudes and behavior as much as actions or reforms. Heads of government are in agree that we must trigger national development agendas of transformation with both speed and scale. We have a date with destiny against 1.5 degrees. We know that that is what is needed to survive. And the implications for people, even as we speak, can be dire. But if there is a failure to act with clarity of purpose, and if the political will retards progress on the front of the much-needed reform within the international financial institutions, purely because heads of government do not speak to ministers of finance when they reach Washington, D.C., or their board directors, if there is a need for that to be dealt with, then, my friends, there must be a commitment to be equal to the current challenges of member states if we are not to perpetuate the discriminatory practices that result in undermining the transformational opportunities that we need. Depriving vulnerable countries from being able to access concessional income that is long enough to build the resilience to save lives and to protect livelihoods is unjust. And that is why we must remain focused. That is why, my friends, we launched yesterday the third iteration of the Bridgetown Initiative, which identifies three key principles, very simply. One, we must change the rules of the international financial system and reform its governance and instruments. Two, we must shock-proof vulnerable economies by dealing with debt and liquidity in a comprehensive, development-focused manner. And if we need to give countries a shot of liquidity like we give them a shot of adrenaline to avoid them falling off the cliff of death, then we must do so. And thirdly, we must augment financing by boosting country capacity to invest in resilience by several means, including what has been announced already, the rechanneling of special drawing rights through our multilateral development partners, but that will only be truly effective if there is another issuance of SDRs in the near future. Indeed, we must also address the challenge, and this I believe to be the fundamental mission of this generation, of how we are going to secure the global public commons to be able to maintain our safety and stability as a global community. We're going to have to discuss how we can secure it, and of course, how we must finance it. And that is not only the climate crisis or the loss of biodiversity that we speak about, but the other many global challenges that can truly destabilize countries and regions. Mr. President, these considerations are of fundamental importance to the sustainable existence of our generations, future generations. The SIDS agenda is another story of promises made but not kept. 30 years ago, the international community gathered in my own country to take action for the first time on the unique challenges faced by small island developing states. We birthed in my home country the first ever global agenda for for small island developing states, which became known as the Barbados Program of Action. I thank Mauritius for its strategy of implementation, Samoa for its pathway. They were carriers of the baton of a development agenda for small island developing states.
That national solutions to global problems do not work. We come to Glasgow with global ambition to save our people and to save our planet. But we now find three gaps. On mitigation, climate pledges or NDCs. Without more, we will leave the world on a pathway to 2.7 degrees, and with more, we are still likely to get to 2 degrees. These commitments made by some are based on technologies yet to be developed, and this is at best reckless and at worst dangerous. On finance, we are $20 billion short of the $100 billion, and this commitment, even then, might only be met in 2023. On adaptation, adaptation finance remains only at 25%, not the 50-50 split that was promised nor needed given the warming that is already taking place on this earth. Climate finance to frontline small island developing states declined by 25% in 2019. Failure to provide the critical finance and that of loss and damage is measured, my friends, in lives and livelihoods in our communities. This is immoral and it is unjust. If Glasgow is to deliver on the promises of Paris, it must close these three gaps. So I ask to you, what must we say to our people living on the front line in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Pacific, when both ambition and regrettably some of the needed faces at Glasgow are not present? What excuse should we give for the failure? In the words of that Caribbean icon, Eddie Grant, will they mourn us on the front line? When will we, as world leaders across the world, address the pressing issues that are truly causing our people angst and worry, whether it is climate or whether it is vaccines? Simply put, when will leaders lead? Our people are watching, and our people are taking note. And are we really going to leave Scotland without the resolve and the ambition that is sorely needed to save lives and to save our planet? How many more voices and how many more pictures of people must we see on these screens without being able to move? Or are we so blinded and hardened that we can no longer appreciate the cries of humanity? I have been saying to Barbadians for many years that many hands make light work. Today, we need the correct mix of voices, ambition, and action. Do some leaders in this world believe that they can survive and thrive on their own? Have they not learned from the pandemic? Can there be peace and prosperity if 1/3 of the world literally prospers and the other 2/3 of the world live under siege and face calamitous threats to our well-being? What the world needs now, my friends, is that which is within the ambit of less than 200 persons who are willing and prepared to lead. Leaders must not fail those who elect them to lead. And I say to you, there is a sword that can cut down this Gordian knot, and it has been wielded before. The central banks of the wealthiest countries engaged in $25 trillion of quantitative easing in the last 13 years. 25 trillion. Of that, 9 trillion was in the last 18 months to fight the pandemic. Had we used that 25 trillion to purchase bonds, to finance the energy transition, or the transition of how we eat, or how we move ourselves in transport, we would now today be reaching that 1.5 degrees limit that is so vital to us. I say to you today in Glasgow, that an annual increase in the SDRs of $500 billion a year for 20 years, put in a trust to finance the transition, is the real gap, Secretary General, that we need to close, not the 50 billion being proposed for adaptation. And if 500 billion sounds big to you, guess what? It is just 2% of the 25 trillion. This is the sword we need to wield. Our excitement 1 hour into this event is far less than it was 6 months ago leading up to this event. Can we, with those voices and these speeches from Sir David and others, find it within ourselves to get the resolve to bring Glasgow back on track? Or do we leave today believing that it was a failure before it starts? Our world,
Now, when it comes to being bold, when it comes to championing climate change, and when it comes to strong leadership and vision, when it comes to economic and social reforms, I think it is time to acknowledge the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mottley. Now, she has spoken out on various instances where she actually defends Africa, she defends the Caribbean, and she defends the black race. I feel like we are not appreciating her that much, that we are doing very little to acknowledge that we have a very great black leader in the Caribbean. Now, not like other puppets who keep on saying the otherwise and doing the other thing. Now, I think this is the time we should talk about Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados. Now, under Mottley's leadership, we are seeing so many things happening in Barbados. Now, we are seeing so many reforms getting to take place in Barbados. I mean black reforms. It is the other day that Mottley was talking about we should be having actually a flight ticket from Africa, a direct ticket from Africa to Caribbean and to other parts where black people are. Now, I think these are some of the things that other leaders in Africa and in the Caribbean will never talk about, because they fear the black unity, because their masters have told them that black people should not unite. And the only reason that you should stay in power and we will continue funding you is making sure that black reforms, that which will see black people actually uniting and coming together, do not take place. Now, I think at some moment she actually upsets the Western countries. Like there is a speech she gives out in the G7 where she reprimands Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Emmanuel Macron for blaming black people, blaming the Caribbean, blaming Africa for the atrocities that the world is facing right now, for the climate change, the adverse climate change, for the global warming that the world is facing right now, that we've formulated very poor policies to make sure that we are getting out of this monster called global warming. But how do you come out with solutions for the problems that you didn't cause? It is not the black people who brought global warming. As a matter of fact, it is Europe and the US that through their different industrial revolution reforms that they had, we are seeing global warming, we are seeing climate change. So how are they getting mad for us not implementing the same policies as the ones they have in the US and in Europe? And we are not actually. We are not the ones who came out with the problem. We did not cause this problem. So how are they expecting us to be having the answers and the solutions to the problem that we didn't cause? I think it is such like speeches that have made Mottley to be a standout from other leaders in the Caribbean and in Africa. I can only compare her to the great Michael Mali of Jamaica, and Ibrahim Traore of Africa, and some other good leaders like Nelson Mandela of South Africa. We've had few leaders as black people. in that we have no one who is there to speak for the interest of the common people. That when we elect these people thinking they are going there to speak for us, they have always turned their backs on us and started siding with the oppressor, started talking to the oppressor and taking instructions from the oppressor rather than the people who put them in power. And this even makes me to question the credibility of our own elections and the political systems in Africa. Do we even have the power to elect the people we want, or the people we want are being chosen by the Western countries according to the level of puppetness that they are going to hold when they get to power? So this is whatever makes me to every day appreciate the great leaders we have. And you might be asking yourself, why are so many people obsessed with Barbados Prime Minister Mottley? I think these are some of the reasons. That she had stood out in the world stage and maybe talked someone 1, 2, 3 things that have made sense, unlike some of our leaders who go there to take pictures and post them on social media, worshipping the US government, France government, and all these other Western leaders. So I think in the progressiveness of stance of governments, he has done very excellent. I talked to some of Barbados people in my comment section and they tell me, we really love whatever the Prime Minister is doing. However, it might be less, but they appreciate because the population is not that big. So you expect the GDP and the taxes are not that high. Like they do not collect so much from the taxes. But she has been able to deliver. And this is whatever makes me to think like if she can do this, and if she can actually advocate for Black Americans, advocate for Africans, advocate for Caribbeans from a very small island of Barbados, what's the difference from other Black leaders in Africa? Where did we go wrong? I know where we went wrong. That we elect people who are very angry for power and people who are ready to sell their souls to get money, to be millionaires, people who are ready to sell their conscience just to go and have maybe to be welcomed to a White House and to go to the Pentagon House and all that stuff. This is the time, Black brothers and sisters, let's wake up. I just wish Black Americans could be helping Black people to think sometimes, because in Africa, many people do not know whatever is happening. And I keep on saying, in Africa, people are living a lie. You live a life that you shouldn't be living. We basically live on minerals, but we don't know. They will come and extract the minerals, and we never benefit from it. So this is the time. I think however much she has been championing for climate change, she has also been addressing some of the very pressing issues in Africa and in the Caribbean, and which that regards Black people. And to be honest, I like the historic significance that she brings around. She was in South Africa and we saw how much she actually acknowledges that Black people should unite. It doesn't matter if you come from Africa, that if you are an African who stays in the US or in Canada, Mexico, wherever, it doesn't matter. The thing that matters, it's our unity. And that's why they do not want us to unite. They keep on gaslighting us so that we continue hating each other. And that's how they have won over time. And that's why we see ourselves fighting each other instead of fighting the monster that is coming to eat us, the monster that has eaten and destroyed our lives, the monster that has been there and is still continuing to destroy the lives of our children to come, and the lives of our parents who lived and the grandparents who lived, and our own lives. Brothers and sisters, I might want to speak a lot, but allow me to say thank you so much for having taken the time to watch this video. Let's unite. Black unity means a lot to me, to you, to this planet, and to every other Black American out there. Thank you so much. Gracious.